I noticed the spreadsheet said the account number was wrong. That was the first crack. I'm a CPA. I spent 23 years looking at numbers that don't add up, and my brain is wired to notice when something is one digit off. It's not a gift. It's more like a curse. Because once you see a discrepancy, you can't unsee it. The account number on the quarterly filing was off by 2 digits from the one we'd been using for 11 years. Our joint business account, the one my wife Diana and I opened together the year after our wedding, right after we incorporated Morrison Logistics. 2 digits transposed. Most people would call it a typo. I called it a Tuesday afternoon that turned into the worst 6 months of my life. Let me back up. Diana and I met at a conference in Cincinnati in 2001. She was there representing a freight company. I was there auditing one. She laughed at something I said that wasn't even that funny, and I thought, that's the one. We were married 18 months later in a small ceremony in her hometown. Her brother stood up for her side. My college roommate stood up for mine. It was simple and perfect. We built Morrison Logistics from nothing. Diana handled operations and client relationships. I handled the books. We had a rule from the beginning. No secrets in the business, no secrets at home. Every decision went through both of us. It wasn't always efficient, but it worked. We trusted each other completely. Our son was 20 when all of this started. He was away at school in Arizona, studying engineering. Our daughter was 24, living about 40 minutes away with her husband. We talked to both of them every week. Sunday evenings, like clockwork. By any measure, my life looked exactly like what I had worked for. I remember the specific Tuesday it started. I was preparing the Q3 estimated tax payment and cross-referencing the business account number against the prior year filing. The number on the new form was 7734921. The number I had in my records was 7734921. I assumed it was a data entry error on my part. I corrected it, filed the form, and moved on. But that night at dinner, something sat wrong with me. I kept chewing on it. Diana was talking about a new client she was courting out of Nashville. She was animated, excited. I watched her hands move when she talked, the same way they always did, and I thought, no. I'm being paranoid. It's a typo. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I was pulling together year-end documentation, and I found the discrepancy again, this time on a wire confirmation. The same account number, 7734921. Not 7773-mine21, and this one had a name attached to it that I didn't recognize. DSR Consulting, LLC. I had never heard of DSR Consulting. We had never heard of DSR Consulting. We had never done business with DSR Consulting. But $11,000 had been wired to them in September. I sat very still for a long time. I want to be clear about what I felt in that moment, because it's important. I did not feel anger. I felt the same cold, clinical thing I feel when I find a problem in an audit, a kind of distant clarity, like the room gets very quiet and very bright at the same time. My brain shifted into work mode. Find the source, trace the numbers, follow the paper. I pulled every transaction from the past 14 months. I created a separate spreadsheet, old habit, and I went through everything line by line. DSR Consulting appeared 7 times. The transfers ranged from $8,000 to $22,000. The total was just over $112,000. $112,000 moved out of our business account to an entity I had never heard of. Over the course of just over a year, I looked up DSR Consulting LLC in the state business registry. It was registered in Nevada. The registered agent was a formation service, the kind people use when they want privacy. The sole member listed was a D. Reardon. Diana's maiden name was Reardon. I closed my laptop and went to bed at 9:30. Diana was already asleep. I lay in the dark and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about 14 months of Sunday dinners and vacation planning and anniversary cards. I thought about the new truck we had talked about buying for the business. I thought about how many times in the past year I had asked Diana if everything was okay, because she seemed a little distant, and she had said she was just tired. I did not wake her up. I did not say anything. I have learned in 23 years of accounting that you never confront a problem before you understand its full shape. You gather everything first. Then you act. The next morning, I got up at 5 and started over. It took me 4 days to piece together what she had done. DSR Consulting was a pass-through. The money went in, and it went back out again to a personal checking account that I traced through a secondary wire transfer. I couldn't see whose account it was from the business records alone, but I had enough to know this was not an accident, and it was not a typo. On the 5th day, I did something I'm not entirely proud of. Diana's laptop was in her home office. We had always had a policy of transparency with our devices, open access, no passwords between us. That policy, it turned out, had not been mutual for some time. Her laptop was password protected in a way it hadn't been before. She had changed it sometime in the past year. I noticed it because I went to use it once when mine was charging, and she had taken it away from me with a laugh and said something about client confidentiality. I had let it go. I didn't have her password. But I didn't need it, because Diana had a habit of printing things. She liked paper. She'd always said she thought better when she could hold something in her hands, and in the small recycling bin she kept under her desk, the one she emptied herself. Always, never asked me to do it. I found 3 pages she had apparently meant to shred, but printed instead on a day the shredder was broken. They were account statements. The personal checking account, the one the money from DSR had been flowing into. The name on the account was not Diana's. It was not a joint account. It was held by a man named Craig Farrell. I knew Craig Farrell. I had known Craig Farrell for 9 years. He was our operations manager, the man who had been with us since we were a 4-person company, the man who called me Marcus and clapped me on the shoulder at the Christmas party and once helped me carry Diana's mother's furniture up 3 flights of stairs when she moved into her assisted living apartment. I sat on the floor of Diana's office for a while. I'm 51 years old, and I sat on the hardwood floor like a kid, and I just breathed. I want to stop here and tell you what I did not do. I did not call Craig. I did not confront Diana. I did not call a lawyer, not yet. What I did was go back to the numbers, because the numbers were the only thing I trusted right now, and because somewhere in the back of my mind a different thought was forming. A worse thought. A thought that said, this is too organized for just an affair. I went back 14 months, then I went back 24, then I went back 36. DSR Consulting had only been active for 14 months, but Craig Farrell had been depositing irregular payments, smaller ones ranging from $1,500 to $4,000 into a separate personal account for nearly 4 years. Those payments appeared on our books as vendor invoices from a company called Farrell Equipment Services. We had used a Farrell equipment in the first year of the business. I had assumed these were continuations of that relationship. I had never looked closely because Diana handled vendor contracts and I trusted her. 4 years. Over 4 years, Craig and Diana had moved approximately $380,000 out of our company. $380,000. Our company had been profitable for years, but we were not a large operation. That amount represented nearly 2 full years of net earnings. I had been reinvesting profit, deferring my own salary increases, planning to retire at 62, and for 4 years, I had been funding something I didn't know existed. I thought about the trip Diana had taken to a client summit in Scottsdale 18 months ago. I thought about Craig's new truck, nicer than the one he'd had before, the one I'd silently noted and assumed he'd gotten a car loan for. I thought about the weekend Diana had said she was visiting her college roommate in Chicago and had come back with a haircut and a tan. I called my attorney on a Thursday morning and told him I needed to meet immediately and that I needed him to bring his white-collar partner. The meeting lasted 3 hours. I laid out everything I had, the spreadsheets, the printed statements, the entity filings. My attorney looked at his partner about halfway through and said nothing, but I understood the look. This wasn't just a civil matter. This was wire fraud. This was embezzlement. This was potentially a federal case. They told me not to touch anything at work. Don't move funds. Don't alert Craig. Don't change account access. Let the investigation build quietly. They were going to bring in a forensic accountant to validate my findings, and then they were going to call the FBI. I want to tell you what the next 2 weeks were like, because they were the strangest of my life. I went to the office every day. I sat across from Craig at our Monday morning check-in meetings, and I talked about freight routes and client retention rates. I watched him nod and take notes. I went home and had dinner with my wife, and I asked her about her day, and she asked about mine, and I said everything was fine. I have never been a good liar. I have always believed that was a point of pride. Those 2 weeks taught me I was capable of it when I had to be. The FBI became involved on a Friday in November. I was told in advance and I was asked to behave normally that morning. I came in at 8, made coffee, answered 2 emails. At 9:15, 2 agents came through the front door and I stepped back and let them work. Craig's face when he saw them, I replay that sometimes. Not with satisfaction exactly, more with a kind of sadness. He had been good at his job. He had been someone I thought I knew. Diana was not at the office that morning. She was home. 2 other agents went to the house. I did not go home that night. I stayed at a hotel. My attorney called me at 6 in the evening and told me that both Diana and Craig had been taken in for questioning, that seizure orders had been placed on the accounts connected to DSR Consulting and the Farrell equipment invoices, and that the matter was being referred for federal prosecution. He said it in a careful language attorneys use. Measured. Professional. I thanked him. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and I looked at the wall for a long time. My daughter called me 3 times that night. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. I called her the next morning. She already knew. Diana had called her first, apparently, before the agents arrived. My daughter was crying and confused and trying to tell me something, and I finally had to ask her to slow down and say it clearly. She said, "Dad, I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what. But about 8 months ago, Mom said something to me. She said that if anyone ever asked me where she'd been on a particular weekend, to say she'd been with me. I said okay because she was my mother and I didn't ask questions. I'm so sorry." I took a long breath. I said, "I know. It's okay. It wasn't entirely okay. But I meant it the way you mean it when someone steps on your foot accidentally. It wasn't okay, but it wasn't their sin to carry. My daughter had been used, and she was 24, and she had loved her mother without understanding what her mother was doing. I didn't want her carrying guilt that belonged to someone else. I did tell her, gently, that if anyone in an official capacity asked her about that conversation, she needed to be honest. She needed to tell the truth about what her mother had asked her to do. She cried harder when I said that. I let her. My son called from Arizona. He didn't say much. He was 20 and he didn't know what to say, so I told him that everything would be handled, that the business was secure, that he did not need to come home. He said he was coming anyway. He was there by Saturday evening. The 3 of us sat in my kitchen, me, my daughter, her husband, my son, and I laid out everything in plain language. Not to lecture them or perform for them, but because they deserved to know the actual shape of what had happened. No gaps. No softening. They were adults, and it was their family too. My daughter's husband said very little, but at one point he looked at my daughter with an expression I recognized, and I thought, there's more there. I didn't press it that night. Later, over the following weeks, my daughter told me what I had already suspected. Her husband had noticed she was keeping something from him, had asked her directly, and she had admitted to covering for her mother. They had a hard few months. They worked through it. I'm glad they did. The federal case moved the way federal cases move. Slowly, with a lot of documentation requests and attorney phone calls and things I was not allowed to discuss in detail. What I can tell you is that both Diana and Craig were indicted on wire fraud and embezzlement charges. Craig's separate personal account, when the forensic team was done with it, showed a total of $412,000 that could not be accounted for by legitimate income. The civil matter ran alongside the criminal one. The business accounts were partially recoverable. Some of the DSR funds had not yet been dispersed and were returned. The 4 years of Farrell equipment invoices were harder. My attorneys pursued a civil judgment which I eventually received, though collecting on it is a different matter entirely. I want to be honest with you about the divorce, because I think people sometimes expect these stories to have a clean emotional through line. There wasn't one. I was angry. Of course I was. But more than angry, I was tired. And more than tired, I was bewildered. The way you're bewildered when you realize a thing you believed was solid has been hollow for years without you knowing. You start second-guessing everything. You reread old calendar entries. You wonder about the vacation where she seemed happy and quiet. Was she happy because she was with me, or because she was thinking about something else? You don't get answers to those questions. You just learn to stop asking them. The divorce was finalized 8 months after the agents came through my office door. Diana did not contest the property division. I kept the business. She walked away from it entirely as part of the settlement, which, Given the circumstances, her attorney apparently advised was the wisest possible course. I kept the house too. It needed new floors and a paint job, both of which I handled myself over 2 weekends last spring. My son flew in to help with the floors. We didn't talk much while we worked. It was good. The quiet. The kind of quiet that means something. The business is doing well. Better than well, actually. Part of that is the forensic audit, which turned up some inefficiencies I hadn't seen because I'd been too close to the day-to-day operations. Losing Craig hurt in the short term. He genuinely had been good at his job. But the person we brought in to replace him found 3 vendor contracts that had been quietly overcharging us for years. Another gift from the audit, I suppose. I hired a new operations manager 6 months ago. He's 34, detail-oriented, and deeply uninterested in drama. He calls me Mr. Morrison. I keep telling him to call me Marcus. He says he will, and then the next Monday he calls me Mr. Morrison again. I've stopped correcting him. I'm not writing this to tell you I have everything figured out. I'm 51. I run a logistics company out of a mid-sized city in the Midwest. I work on Saturdays sometimes because I genuinely like the work. I have 2 kids who are mostly okay, and one of them is getting better at calling more than just when something is wrong. I'm writing this because when I was sitting on that hotel bed the night the agents came, I tried to remember the last time I had fully trusted my own perception of things, and I couldn't. I had 112,000 reasons to have questioned things sooner, and I hadn't, because I trusted someone, and I am still not sure whether that was weakness or just what love looks like from the inside. What I know now is this: the numbers don't lie. They wait. They sit in spreadsheets and quarterly filings and wire confirmations, patient as anything, until the day someone is ready to read them clearly. I was ready on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I just didn't know it yet.